Hello and welcome back to the Demis Hellen channel. This is the arpeggio series, but we're going to be looking at transposing this into the trance melody or trance pattern series or something like that, where we can focus more on the chord structures and we can start building and generating ideas based on a few simple techniques that are not unheard of, but just best demonstrated in certain ways to help you understand how we can sort of start developing a melody. So you can see on screen here at the moment we've got our pattern and one bar is selected. So this pattern here is repeated over 8 bars. That's 1 bar of pattern. So that sounds like this. So I've gone for a repetitive pattern over sort of like half bar. So it repeats every half bar. But you can change this up. You can do simple things like just say delete that note, shift everything 1/16 over, replace the end note, and you can have a slightly different pattern in the second half of your bar. So it really depends what you're going for, but I want to go for something that's quite, not generic, but favourable. You recognise the pattern. Okay, and then if I just zoom out a little bit, we've got our scale, which is A minor today. We're going to always work in A minor, usually, just because it's all white notes. It's easy to follow if you're not familiar with your scales. And then we have our 4 chords here, A, F, G, and E. We're going to be using a 1-6-7 progression today, but we are going to incorporate a 4th chord in there to start with, and then I'm going to show you how I sort of rein it back and sort of solidify the melody. So jumping out of there, let's just have a look at today's preset. So if you're a Patreon supporter, you'll get access to the MIDI and the preset. But in today's video, it's just the MIDI because the preset is part of the new pack. If you want to get the pack, there is an offer on the full collection. But if you want to head over and grab this, they're only a tenner. You can just grab the leads pack or the plucks pack, depending on what you want. If you want them all, you can obviously buy the collection at a heavily discounted price, and that includes 3 Cubase projects, 1 Cubase project, Ableton and Logic project, so like a template trance track, and you get all of the MIDI as well. So that is 120 presets, 90 MIDI stems, 20 samples because the effects pack is just single MIDI triggering them, so I've made some effects for you, and then 3 template projects for you as well, depending on the DAW that you're working in. So the only thing I've changed on this preset is I've changed the dry signal down here on the left. So it's the ability to control the wet effects, the delay and the reverbs. You can turn them off and have your own if you want to, or you can have like a blend of both, or you can have them fully wet. It depends on what you're looking for. I am going for sort of like partially turned off. So we're just reducing the effect on that particular sample. So we're going to work with the filter closed. It's much nicer on the ears for all of us. But let's start making our progression. So let's take a look. Let's loop this whole section. Now, the main thing that I work with is using the chords to move around the sort of like melodic notation. So you can see the scale is A to A, all white notes. And we're starting with an A chord. How do we know we're starting with A? We've already got A in the root, and we've also got A in the top as well. So we're going to use that as our starting point. So we've got an A chord. So we've got a choice of A, C, and E. If we want to keep it simple, not try to use any of the notes at random in the scale. So I'm going to use this and I'm going to move to the 3rd. So when I'm talking like 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, it's just the note in the scale. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So if I say I'm going to add a 7th, I'm going to add a G in there. If I'm going to add a 5th, it's going to be an E. So with that, I've added the 3rd in, so the C, and that's going to give us this progression. So it sounds nice, it flows well, and sort of returns back to A very nicely. So with the second one, I'm actually going to move up to E. So let's just highlight this whole bar here. I'm going to move this up to E. Now we can look at E and we can see E, G, and B. So you can see we've got E, G is going to be our 3rd. So I'm going to move those notes down. So you can see it's starting to develop a little bit of a theme there. So you can see that we've got E in the bass, and we started with A here, so we didn't actually start with the third. So what we can do is transpose that up to E. Let's keep things the same. So it's going to go up and then it's going to drop right down, and that's going to give you some movement in your melody. So you can see it's naturally flowing through that melody there just by using the third of each one. So the first and the third note in our chord. So with the next note, because we dropped to an E, we'll drop to an F. So we're going to actually rise up to an F. So that's gone transposed down. So there we are. So we're now going up to an F, that next bar. Then we can see from F, we've got an A as our third. It returns back to the A where it was at the beginning. So we're just really mimicking the first part, but we've got a different note in the bass. But if we want to keep that the same, then that would have to be F. But let's just have a listen to how it sounds first, because it's all about how you feel about the melody. Does it flow nicely? So personally, I think just that little rise up to the A works, which is the third straight off the bat in that F chord. If we went to F, if we kept the continuity going, I think it might jump around a little bit too much. See, the F doesn't sound right, it doesn't fit right with the melody, so we're going to leave that as A. So how can we make the second part of the progression different? How can we make that move? Well, we can use the fifth note, so the final note in our triad. So if we've got an F, you can see here, got, where are we? F, A, and C. So we can actually rise that up to C and utilize the final part of the chord. And you can see even returning to A, even though it doesn't make sense, it sounds nice, it flows well. So for that final chord, so you can see that we've used the A, E, and F. We've just got the G left. So I am going to take that up to G. And again, let's try, first of all, using the G, which is going to be up here. I think that's going to jump too far. But no, that sounds good. I'm happy with that for now. Ignore what I'm saying here. But then what we can do is utilize. So if we look at the G, we can see that third is a B, which will bring us back down nicely to this level. Then you can see as it loops back round, it's going to drop to the A. So it's going to move one note in the scale and it's going to give it a nice rounded feel. So you can see it just seamlessly loops back round. It doesn't sound awkward. It doesn't sound like it's unresolved. It works. So that's the basic way of setting up a melodic sequence. Now, we said that we're going to use a 1-6-7 chord structure. So what we can do here is take this second one. Let's just highlight that again. Transpose that back down to A. So then we have 1, 7, 1, 6, and 7. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is the F, and 7, which is the G. And you can see we've got an F and a G. So instead of moving that one, that bass note, so you can see obviously we've not used. So you can see just transposing that down, we're going to sort of like hold the note, and now we need to see if these two positions still work. And that works quite nicely. Let's just turn up. Let's just, we have more automation over here. So I'm just leveling off the automation as best as I can for this video, so we're not wasting time. So that sounds really nice. It holds a bit long, so maybe that final bar, we can just break the rule and reintroduce that note. So you can see we've got the E and the G, we're just, the F and the G, we're missing the E. So I'm going to introduce that there. So another way to round off the melody, so give it a nice seamless loop back round, you might not want to make the bass continuously rise at that point. If you transpose that G down 1 octave, you can see it sits just under the starting point of the A, so in the same octave range, which is C1, so that first octave range. So it might sound a little bit more rounded. So you need to remember patterns give you different energies, different vibes to your sound. It's going to give you a different pace. Is it going to be sounding slow, sounding fast? And I can guarantee you this first portion sounds slow. This second portion sounds fast. So let's just have a listen. So what's happening here, if you haven't spotted this already, these notes are quite far away. So the bass notes are quite far away from the melody notes. So you're going to hear these being more pronounced, these less pronounced, because they're lower and they're not as sharp, they're not tack sharp. So you get that sort of like slower movement. But these ones where they're higher in the octave, so you've gone into the C2 range, you can see here these notes are so close to these notes as well that they sort of bounce off each other a lot quicker because there's less distance for the note and the ear to move to that note. And then you can see as soon as we drop that an octave there, that G down to an octave below this note, then it just sounds like we've just got that kind of rhythm playing more prominently when we haven't done anything apart from move those bass notes. So just listen again to these two, how we sort of hear it all integrated, and then we hear these become more pronounced because this is so low down. So if that's the vibe you're going for, that's absolutely fine. You could use that at the very end of your phrase before you bring in the outro, for example. That would work. But I'm going to opt for having it higher just because we're reducing the distance between them. They're still far away, but they're not as obviously far away. So it just keeps the pace, and then the starting point sounds a little bit more distant, which works for me. It sounds nice. We could transpose that an octave, but then it would overlap our starting point. So from that, you can see we've got our chord structure. We've used very, very simple maneuvers, and you can see from that we've reined in that second chord, but just reintroduced it for that last bar just to sort of like elevate the melody a little bit. And just before we end the video, I'm just going to show you a few more tips here. So if you've made it this far, let me know in the comments. And there is a second MIDI file for you patrons as well. So jumping in here, we finish on B, but it sounds natural, but it doesn't sound, professional is probably not the word to use, but it doesn't sound like we've ended the melody. It's like a car. You get all the effort put into the front and the side and the profile, but then the back of the car usually just like gets chopped off, or they just don't really think about it. Well, that's how I feel about cars. So a lot of cars just don't seem to think about the rear side of the car. So this is the back end of the melody. You just want to get it sort of looping back round quickly, but we can make some tweaks. So using this, we can see we've got a G chord and we're using the third. We've got the option of the fifth, which you can see here from the G chord listed here, B, D. We could opt for D here. But again, it sounds like the melody is then going to continue on. And that is the same with B. It loops back round nicely, but it does sound like you could carry it on, which is absolutely fine. You could do 16-bar melody. That's absolutely, definitely possible. But with this one, because it's 8 bars, I'm going to actually use the second note in the G chord, which is an A. So it's the first note in the scale after G, and that's going to give us a much more refined tone, plus it's the same starting note at the beginning. And I think that just loops around better, and that just gives a much more wholesome, rounded off tone for me. So that's personally my decision, but it might work for you. And secondly, using half steps in the scale. So a half step, you might have heard me talking about these before. If we look at the scale, you can see all the notes are separated by notes that are not in the scale, like this G here. This F sharp is not in the scale because it's lit up orange. So we're sort of like jumping from F to G over another note. But you can see these two are right next to each other, half steps. So we've got an E and an F, and we've got a B and a C. So you can see we've utilized one half step, E to F, in the bass. But we can do the same with the melody. So if you wanted to really sort of like bring out the melody, we can use these half steps. So we've got a C here in the melody, and we've got one here. And let's just say we want to progress to that. We just drop down those 4 notes, for example, to B. Can you hear how we start developing a different sort of like tone, a different ID to the sound? Let's just have 3 on there, and maybe again here. Okay, so that's a little bit too early. I am going to opt for those ones there, but can you hear what's happening with the melody? Because we're holding the A over 3 bars instead of changing at that one, it can easily sort of like get boring for a second. So changing up the sort of notation on the top of that bass is going to give you a little bit of movement and sort of keep the listener interested in your melody before the bass changes. So again, before we move that, let's just put that back on C. It's quite drawn out to get to that point, and it sounds okay, but having this little rise here just like piques the interest a little bit. So I think actually the B ending up there sounds much better. And then you can hear, I think it just holds on to that a little bit too much. I do this by ear. How do I feel about the melody? Does it need to hold that note? Sometimes it does. That one seems like it holds a bit too much. So we could opt, let's just put an F in there, for example. See what I mean? We're sort of moving it. That's not the note to choose. But because we're on F, we can choose F, A, C, E. So we could do that. So you've got all these movements that you can create. I'm not going to do that, but just to show you that we can even move it, even maybe just moving up to that next note, or maybe utilizing the E and the F here as well, which are the half steps. And you can see that sounds so much better. In my opinion, you've got the interest being piqued and sparked in the second bar, whereas before it was sort of laboured and held back. So just jumping in and refining it a little bit gives you that little bit more room to manoeuvre. And then just on top of that, as another tip, you can fill these other gaps in. Even though the bass is filling all the gaps between these notes, we can introduce, say, higher notes to sort of like give a little sparkle out of the MIDI. So I don't know if it's going to work with this one, but we'll give it a shot. So what we're doing there is creating a counter melody, but that's a whole different topic. But you can hear what we're doing there. I've just positioned them on the beat of each start of each bar, even just doing a simple pattern over the top like that maybe. Obviously, you'd continue that pattern across and you'd have a counter melody with a different preset sound. So that's how we can do that as well. So thank you very much for watching the video. If you did enjoy it and you want to see more, you know exactly what to do. All of the buttons and links are down below. And if you want to get the Uplifting Vital Pack that is brand new to my store, you can obviously head to the link in the description to go and grab a copy of that. So thank you very much for watching. I'll look forward to seeing you all in the next video. Take care.